You said too often the neoliberalism in prisons?
Yes.
That was right there. That was right there.
Go. Uniqueness. U.S. soft power is declining now. Column 14. Our soft power, the power to convince and gain acceptance through passive means, is waning. Even our influence over our own citizens is shrinking. And marijuana legalization increases U.S. soft power. Stance 14. Look out for marijuana reform. This will mark Obama's application of soft power, allowing states legislation such as this. Obama has overseen and indirectly enabled the promotion of a liberal notion via the non-federal small government. That's a slam dunk for everyone. And the plan's contribution to a more open and tolerant society increases U.S. soft power. Mitchell 11. Soft power relies heavily on the image of the U.S. abroad as a tolerant, democratic, fair, and open society. Any deviance from this image by the U.S. will be noticed and will undermine American efforts to assert soft power and achieve its aims. And soft power is a mask for modern-day empire. Jasanoff 13. Informal empire has received little sustained attention from scholars, even though it remains the kind of empire most apparent in the world today under labels such as soft power. And soft power is cultural imperialism, and colonialization is the glue that holds empire together. Petrus 04. The use of soft power is just as important as hard power in sustaining and expanding the empire. Soft power is another way of talking about cultural imperialism. Cultural imperialism implies recognition that subjectivity is a force for sustaining imperial rulership. Subjectivity is a learned relationship. One is neither born to be a slave or a revolutionary. Between the objective world, classes, and ethnic groups is the subjective social context which influences perception and social action. The imperial use of soft power is directed at creating an ideological screen to filter out critical analysis and to promote a positive identification with the symbols and interests of imperial power. And imperialism leads to coercive violence. Sharma 13. Vijay, an associate professor at Singapore's Nanyang University, told the conference, culture can be used to coerce. There are many, many examples where culture can motivate violence. And coercive violence that outweighs war and conflict. Barsh 93. Colonialism operates at a personal, psychological, and cultural level. Colonialism is the abuse of an entire civilization for generations. It creates a culture of mistrust, defensiveness, and self-rejection. This can produce politics of resignation and continuing dependence on outsiders for leadership. Intense warfare can be less damaging than the captivity and daily disciplining of an entire population. Prolonged exposure to the perspectives of others casts a long critical shadow on one's own beliefs and actions. It shatters assumptions about what is, what ought to be, and what may be possible. And K. As reformism is doomed to fail due to failure to cope with the deeper antagonisms of modernity, the result is securitized and militarized responses to crises that culminate in war. Ahmed 12. The 21st century heralds the unprecedented acceleration of multiple interconnected global crises: climate change, energy depletion, food scarcity, and economic instability. Policy responses towards these crises have been inadequate because scholars view them as separate processes. Yet, evidence shows they are deeply interwoven manifestations of global political economy. Orthodox IR's flawed diagnoses of crises lead to their securitization, reifying militarization of policy responses, and naturalizing the proliferation of violent conflicts. Global crises are linked to the otherization of social groups. This relationship between global crises and conflict is not necessary, but a failure to interrogate their structural causes. Bureaucratic compartmentalization and policy planning has meant these crises are approached as largely separate processes. It is often assumed that these contemporary structures need to be secured rather than transformed. Policymakers overlook existing structural obstacles to the implementation of desired reforms. Orthodox IR reifies a fragmented ontology of the international system which underlies technocratic and compartmentalized approach to global crises. Rather than crises being understood holistically, they are securitized, requiring militarized responses and/or future interstate negotiations. This exacerbates the danger of reactionary violence and the naturalization of proliferation of wars and humanitarian disasters. And security is based on a desire to control and manage. It's ontological precept to attempt to render everything knowable and hence predictable. It means that random variation in IR ensures aggression and enemy creation. The impact is mass war and violence. Vote neg to reprogram our ontological presuppositions. Burko 7. Such drive for ontological certainty limits questioning, confines it within a particular closed system grounded in the truth of being. We are witness to an epistemology of violence joined to an ontology of violence. Both quicken the resort to war and escalation. Violence permeates being. Violence is married to an ontology of insecure existence which itself admits no questioning. Humans have no essence outside their values objects. The need is to critique dominant images of political being and ways of securing that being. Security provides a basic underpinning for limitless resort to violence. Conflict can generate military action because the world is conceived in terms of friend and enemy. The other constitutes an unacceptable threat. This effaces agency, causality, and responsibility from political discourse. All resources are made part of a machinic process of war and violence. The desire to control society is continually frustrated but never abandoned or resolved. Empire-enabled genocide, 2 world wars, and military strategy. Scientific powers threaten absolute destruction. The confidence in being reifies antagonisms. Exchanging an ontology of being for one of becoming provides a less destructive way of dealing with difference. War is the product of hegemonic forms of knowledge. Militarism derives not from particular choices, but from calculative empirical discourses of truth rooted in enlightenment images of being. Policymakers become necessities, actions, inevitabilities, and humans suffer and die. Rationality creates discursive constraints which preordained militarism is necessary. Policy choices cannot be done without seizing alternatives from outside the space of inframing strategic thought. This would seem to hinge upon questioning. And case, neolib. The app cannot solve for neolib because neolib is the extreme version of capitalism that doesn't focus on free markets, but focuses focuses on the ability of the seller to be efficient and competitive. They want the state to be efficient in this, following in the ways of neoliberalism, and they are still competitive due to the fact that the growers of marijuana trying to compete to be regulated by government are not restricted, because the growers of marijuana are not restricted by the state except for a license to marijuana, which doesn't solve for neoliberalism or capitalism. Cap also prevails, which ultimately means the plan doesn't solve for neolib or cap because it creates both neolib and cap. And marijuana legalization creates a white neoliberal market that leaves minority groups, and change their political maneuvering is an empty symbol. Calhoun 14. This year saw fully fledged legal weed markets in America. It is the state-controlled dream of political progressives for a government overhaul of weed. At the root of this is paternalism and extortion. Weed must be legal only under the condition the government acts as a partner and be put into the hands of responsible retailers. Big marijuana is born. Marijuana's legalization seems much more like the neoliberal privatization of markets than true liberalization of them. Even as weed is legalized, those in prison for the crime will remain there. Legalization takes the winners of the weed market from those who already have access to the capital to invest. Even after legalization, many remain shackled by the landscape of the market and by new regulations which prohibit them from participating. It is never by political means we realize our freedom. The direction of the marijuana movement is towards centralization and exclusion, as are all white markets. And analytic, their solvency can't solve for big marijuana because they don't include this important regulation that their solvency advocate, Kleiman, says is essential to stop big marijuana from happening. Plan still allows marijuana advertising and doesn't mandate the state's contract with many small growers, which Climate says is key to preventing big marijuana. Climate 14. By contracting with small growers rather than giant ones, states can check the industry's political power. States could insist that private growers sign contracts forbidding them from marketing to the public. And prisons. Take evidence, and one I see on prisons talks about how legalizing marijuana solves racism, but the part says marijuana legalization is only a small part of solvency. It can't solve for the root in racism because regs will still equal racism. And pot legalization can't solve racial antagonisms. It's a cover for elites to benefit while masking continued oppression of colored bodies. Tape 13. Legalization represents long-term and chilling political costs. Calls to a black civil rights agenda that came with the Brown decision. Brown dismisses separate but equal without dismantling it. Legalization of marijuana could do the same, silencing further claims about this unfairness, since only unfairness left now is punishing drug trafficking. Plessy was struck down because it served the interests of white Americans. We can't fix American racism with American law. Legalization will reduce the public response to racism. Legalization demands appear elitist because legalization only benefits social elites. Medical marijuana illustrates whiteness over poor black and Latino communities. Legalization of one substance will not kill racism. Legalization of marijuana won't free the black and brown prisoners, and rates of incarceration may continue unabated where pot is legal. Decent Americans will still seek to blame blacks and Latinos for the social ills involved in drug use. Minorities will continue to be punished, and racial disparity in sentencing will persist. And rhetoric on war of drugs elicits violence against minorities. It presumes an enemy which is always already non-white. 902. For the Reagan administration, it was easy to construct African Americans, Hispanics, and other people of color as the enemy in the war on drugs. These are the groups white Americans have viewed as sources of vice and crime. Reagan's anti-drug rhetoric was designed to tap into cultural attitudes about people of color. Such rhetoric allows presidents to appear as strong leaders and is strategically ambiguous to portray urban minorities as responsible for problems related to the drug war and for resolving such problems. Reagan sought to exploit this change through a campaign that promised to wage war on drugs. The war on drugs required both weapons and enemies. The professed enemies of the war on drugs were people of color in inner city neighborhoods, people chiefly African Americans and Hispanics. No, by being able to poke holes through their case arguments, it only further proves their plan is just a securitized threat by the government designed to increase governmental power and to reinforce political agendas rather than solving their problems for the right justifications. And time. Ready for Carl 6.
So, I want to talk about your security keg. Can you explain how that interacts with our?
Yes, I can answer that. Pretty much your plan is a securitized threat you're evoking fear into the hearts of African Americans, especially by saying racism can be solved and racism is this horrible thing, which it is, but you're by exploiting that horrible thing of racism and invoking fear and saying we need to legalize marijuana for that reason. It's a securitized threat that's actually, we can have other ways of solving that, because you're using the government, you're treating the government as sovereign, and the government knows all. You're treating this as a securitized threat when it really is not a threat at all.
You said security is based on control.
Yes.
So how does repealing a law which imprisons people increase the government's control?
Do you want me?
You can answer it.
So one of the cards we read stated that this is your plan actually increases paternalism, because it says that people can sell marijuana, but only if the government is involved, and only if the government gets to choose the responsible party that gets to sell. This increases government control, because whereas the government just has a complete ban on it now the government gets to pick and choose who it deems worthy of selling marijuana.
By the government being able to invoke fear into racism will prevail unless we solve for this. By invoking that fear in them, you're solving this for marijuana for the wrong justifications.
Okay. So if we're talking about neoliberalism, what is your link for how, or for your neoliberalism? What's your link for how our plan increases soft power?
Marijuana. We have a card that says marijuana increases.
Samson 14 talks about how when when the federal government allows the states to do something, it increases the federal government's soft power, because it's like, look, all these little individual things that are under our authority, we're letting them do something, and we're letting them do it in the name of solving something that's bad. So that increases U.S. soft power abroad, because people are like, oh, look, the federal government's trying to increase its liberalization in the U.S.
Okay, do you have any evidence concerning whether that predicted increase in soft power has occurred for other countries who have legalized marijuana?
We're not talking other countries, we're
We
talking
don't-
to U.S.
We don't care about other countries.
I understand, but what I'm saying is, does this prediction about the increase in soft power actually occur in practice?
Yes.
That's happening right now.
Well, how can you say that it occurs in practice in terms of the U.S. when the U.S. has never legalized marijuana?
Some states
When they
within the
legalize
US.
marijuana. Soft power is all based on how other countries view yourself. Other countries view yourself like nicely, they're more likely to let you impede onto their cultures. Because marijuana is popular internationally, if we legalize marijuana, other countries will have a better view of us, which will allow us to impede our cultures upon them.
Okay.
Project?